Welcome to the Business of Race podcast, where we discuss issues of race and racism, how they impact businesses, and what organizations can do to effectively address these issues to create a healthier work environment for everyone. I'm your host, Regina Newkirk-Rucci, the Director of Equity for 904. And today I am excited to welcome back to the conference room Deirdre Connor, who is she's a communications consultant. She's also a 904 board member and the founder of Ripple Effects Storytelling and Insights. Welcome back to the conference room, Deirdre.
Thank you so much, Regina. It's an honor to be here.
All right. So before we get started, I know that we both have an addiction to gadgets that might happen to appear in our kitchen. So we'll take a little moment around the water cooler and just talk about what is your favorite kitchen gadget and what is the most ridiculous kitchen gadget or appliance that you own.
Okay, I think we should say it at the same time on the count of three, our favorite.
Oh.
See if it's the same.
I don't think so, but okay.
You don't think so?
No.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Air
Sous
fryer.
vide. Ooh, that would have been my second.
I have a toaster oven / air fryer that changed my life.
I have a grill / air fryer that did the same.
Oh, that's dangerous information.
Ew. Oh, it is.
Tell me about your sous vide.
Well, I really like the sous vide because you get food cooking at the exact temperature that it needs to, and you don't really have the over drying that ovens can do.
Yes.
So for things like brisket or things where you really want a lot of moisture, sous vides are great for that. You're cooking in a water bath. I also gotten very fond of making cheesecake jars.
Ooh.
So you sort of bake the crust in the oven in the glass, and then you put the filling in the jars, do a finger tight lid, and then put them in the sous vide for about 15, 20 minutes. Delicious.
If I end up with one of these, I'll tell my husband who to blame for it. But they take up very little room. So
They do. It's a stick. Now, granted, I also have the bucket and the top and all of that. But the sous vide is actually just a stick.
exactly, it's just a stick.
It's
just a stick.
And you know what? I will tell you, if you would like, you can borrow mine to see if you like using it.
That sounds amazing.
Test it out beforehand.
That sounds amazing.
Okay, so why is the air fryer your favorite?
The air fryer is, first of all, it cooks things really fast. I use it for toast, but I can also use it to make like crispy Brussels sprouts is one of my favorite things to make in it. It makes really good fish sticks, just to be honest with you. Anything that comes from the freezer, it does a great job with, and it doesn't heat up my kitchen as much as my oven does.
You know what I also really like about the air fryer too? For things that I am reheating, especially things that were fried, it's so much better.
So much better.
So, you know, because usually if like I have leftover French fries, I don't even bother. But you throw them back in the air fryer,
you got it. It's also really good for tiny pita pizzas. Makes them very fast. Yes. Yeah.
I have not tried a pita pizza.
Oh, pita pizza is our go-to emergency meal in our house. A pita pizza, you got your canned sauce. You got your cheese that just hangs out in the fridge.
Right.
You got your pitas in the freezer. Can come together at any time.
Wow. Okay.
Especially when you have a small child in the house.
That really makes sense. But I don't even have small children. I'm really intrigued. So that might still happen. Okay. So I think we also have to talk about, since we have an addiction, we admit that, what is the most ridiculous one that you own?
Oh, there's so many potential options, but I think the most ridiculous one that resides in my house is a tiny Christmas-themed waffle maker that makes one tiny waffle that my son got for Christmas, and he has probably used it about half as many times as I have because tiny waffles bring me great joy.
But you do use it.
I do use it. Okay. Not as much as I probably could, but I do use it, yes.
Okay, that's fair. Mine is I have an asparagus steamer pot, which I bet you didn't even know was a thing.
I've never even heard of. I didn't even know that was a thing.
So it's a very long cylinder that you stand the asparagus in, so that the stalks are in the water, but then the rest of it gets steamed.
That sounds brilliant.
It is brilliant. I don't ever use it because I always roast my asparagus. So I don't know why I haven't.
Is it in the microwave? You put it in the microwave?
No. You put it on the stove.
Oh, that sounds like a lot of work.
It's really not. But it's also just not how I cook asparagus. But I saw it and I was like, this is ingenious. I must buy it. And so, yes, it is. It is in my pot collection. But
between the two of us, we probably have every needed and unneeded countertop appliance or kitchen appliance.
I am sure. Like we could have a whole catalog.
Now you heard it here. If you need a countertop or kitchen appliance, check with us first before you buy one.
Well, I will say this: check with us so that we can tell you how to use it or whether or not you should or should get it.
Or that,
yes. But not to get it because we're still not giving them up.
But get the air fryer, the sous vide, and the Instant Pot.
Yes. All of those, absolutely a must. I would also throw a tagine in there. See, this is.
Okay.
It's bad.
Yeah.
It's really bad.
I'm with you.
But wonderful for cooking. All right. So as we move into our agenda topic today, I'm really interested because this is, I think, a unique way for us to do this podcast. Because this is really, I want to look at this more of a case study. And when we think about what organizations should and shouldn't do or how they're addressing DEI, I think this is a really interesting case to look at. And that is the North Face. So North Face has been very prominent about their commitment to DEI, their work in this space. And so they are now offering a 20% discount to customers who take their DEI course. And they have definitely gotten they've gotten some praise and some pushback on that. And so I wanted us to really talk about this from a business standpoint, looking at what they did, why they did it. Does this make sense? Is this a good approach? I think this is a really interesting situation because there's a lot of different looks and takes on this. So I think it's a really interesting one for us to discuss.
And you didn't know this before you pitched this topic, Regina, but I'm a big outdoors person. That's like one of my hobbies and my joys. And I also know that the outdoors industry in general has a huge diversity challenge. So that's really appealed to me from that conversation. I will say I don't own any North Face things because it's a little spendy for me. But I think that this topic was really interesting and I enjoyed learning about it because I didn't know about it until you shared this with me. So looking forward to digging in.
Okay, well, let's do just that. And the North Face, which I think is a pretty prominent company in outdoor wear, right?
Yes.
So things to wear, hiking, camping, just being outside, really nice jackets, and a little on the higher end of the market, right? And as you said, the outdoor wilderness, hiking, that type of recreation has largely been white. That is not something that has been promoted to and largely includes people of color. Now, obviously, there are people of color who engage in it, but that is not the market per se. And so the North Face, they really recognize this. And that's one of the things that they stated. But they're also trying to, I guess, sort of come about with what they it's not quite environmental justice, maybe outdoor justice. I'm not quite sure how I would phrase that.
Yeah.
And trying to level that playing field a little bit more and really address some of what would be considered systemic racism issues that have shown up in this world. But they're getting pushback for saying that, it outdoor stuff is racist or black people can't go outside, all of these things. And I have not taken the training, and I would really like to. But let's sort of talk about just the premise of it. we're going to offer you 20% off if you take a DEI course. What are your thoughts about that just as an approach?
It was really interesting reading about it because on the one hand, folks who are white people in white spaces or predominantly white spaces have a responsibility to talk to each other and to educate one another and work on addressing issues that are inherent in the white community, right? So I think probably came from that spirit. But I didn't take the training either. I think it's only available. I think maybe they've reduced the availability of it. So I would be interested to know about it too. But I think from what I have read that was made public, it was very much oriented toward their customer base, but not being explicit about it. And so when you're doing something like that, when you're creating a space to educate maybe your consumers or create some sort of incentive for that to happen, you got to be really forthcoming about the reason why and who you're intending to target. And so what this created was folks being like, hold on, an expensive outdoor retailer that caters to primarily a white audience is now offering discounts to primarily wealthy white people to learn about racism and injustice and their role in dismantling that. And it's became a head scratcher for a lot of reasons. Meanwhile, it's like, what is being done to center the experiences of people of color in the outdoors? And, the great news is that there are a lot of organizations that are doing that. And I'll drop some of my favorite follows for the show notes of folks who are really advocating for people of color in the outdoors. But it would have been wonderful to see them front and center in some of this discussion and less so sort of this approach that, potentially could have worked if handled differently, but in this particular case, really kind of rang hollow with a lot of different individuals.
Well, and I think this is kind of interesting too, because if you talk about centering people of color in the space, that also somewhat feels artificial to me because there's nothing about the North Face historically that has centered people of color.
Absolutely.
Right? That just hasn't been the experience. And I do think that there have to be some channels, places, and spaces for white people to have conversations with white people about race and racism, because there is a perspective there that only white people have.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, you do run into the challenge of this seems artificial, again, as you said, so we're going to give wealthy white people a discount to learn about something that they should already know about. But at the same time, if they don't, they're bringing this to the table. This is... Every time I go down this road, it is there's this, but then there's this. There's a good, there's a bad. There's a bad, but there's a good. And I don't know exactly where I land on it as far as how I think it should have been done. Now, obviously, I think there were some missteps. As you said, I think if you're going to engage in this, you have to be very clear about who and the why up front. You can't hide, because then people will take a message and run with it.
That's right. That's right. Even ones you didn't intend.
Ones you didn't intend were on the radar at all. Will be a couple of words that people will flip around, and then suddenly that's the whole thing that it's about. And I feel like there's a good likelihood that may have happened. But at the same time, how do you engage the North Face audience? Because I do believe that the desire is sincere, right? From what I have seen from them for the past several years, they really seem to be putting their money where their mouth is. But how do you effectively, as a company, if you want to move your audience into awareness, if you want to move your audience into the social justice space that your company is in, how do you go about doing that in a way that doesn't create this kind of controversy?
So I think a lot about, 9 Forward had Eddie Glaude, who wrote The Fire Inside here in Jacksonville. It was an incredible experience. And one of the things that he said that really stuck with me over all these years is that we have to sell the vision. Mm-hmm. And so, didn't know it was in the training, but I think when you get to a place where you're making like something transactional like this, like get a 20% off coupon, you kind of reduce the inherent value mm-hmm. of what it is. It's like, take this thing and then you can get 20% off, instead of assuming that everyone who comes your way wants to learn and wants to be part of an inclusive and diverse community in the outdoors, and leading with talking about the value that has, talking about the future that we're all trying to create together. Mm-hmm. And it's always going to be a more effective way of bringing folks in than saying, we're kind of reducing this initiative to a transaction that we think you take our class and suddenly you're no longer racist,
right?
And then here's 20% off of your $200 jacket. Is like, it just kind of, it doesn't speak to the why. Mm-hmm. Why do we want a diverse and inclusive outdoors and recreation community? Why do we want a diverse and inclusive community in our own like local areas? And so if you're not leading with those values and communicating about what it is that we're all trying to do here and the future we all want to live in, you're going to turn some people off, number one. Number two, you're not really speaking to the inherent value. The value of an outdoor retailer engaging in this conversation isn't to create this transactional experience where it's like, take this training, even though they were trying to incent it, which is nice. And I, like you said, it's very mm-hmm. well intentioned, but instead to lead with, wouldn't it be great if our outdoor recreation company and community really reflected the U.S. as a whole mm-hmm. and really sold a vision of an outdoors where everybody could feel safe and everybody could feel welcome and everybody could feel included, and like, what would that look like? And let's be in conversation about that, both as our leadership team, which, is almost exclusively white from what I've read and what I saw on their website. I don't want to make any assumptions, but that is a pretty safe bet. And, and also from the standpoint of the customers. Mm-hmm. And so to me, the misstep wasn't trying to bring people into the conversation, but it was more, how do we think about this conversation more broadly? And what can we do to say, how can we bring you into this conversation in a way that feels authentic and in a way that is building a future and not creating or deepening a scarcity mindset?
And I think that's really important, because right now, as we're in the midst of what I would consider almost like the great DEI pushback, mm-hmm. I think a lot of the reason for the pushback is because it does feel transactional. It feels forced. You are putting a label on me that I don't necessarily own, mm-hmm. and you are making me do something that I don't want to do. And that comes from that transactional, the things that
Bingo.
We're going to require, right? But I don't think that organizations really have talked about, why do we want a diverse, equitable, inclusive environment where people really feel like they belong, right? What happens in that space? Because I do think the majority of people, truthfully, and for myself included, I haven't really thought about the outdoors being overwhelmingly white. Now, you bring it up, I'm like, oh yeah, it
mm-hmm.
is.
Yeah. In
right?
many places, yes.
In many places. Yeah. But it's not something that would be at the forefront of my mind.
Yes.
But if you start talking to me about what happens if we expose more communities to the beauty of the outdoors, right? What happens from a health perspective?
Yes.
What happens from a nature and beauty? What happens from, as we are moving toward environmental justice more, what happens when people are in the environment that they want to own it and care for it appropriately?
Exactly.
I mean, if we start at the high level, this is why. And I think, truthfully, that's the piece that's missing. Not that they aren't saying it, but they don't have it. You have to start at the highest levels, because if your vision is a world where everyone enjoys the outdoors and appreciates the beauty and wears our clothes when they're in it
and reaps the benefits of being in the outdoors.
Right. Because then all of the policies and things that you do support that vision. And it also gives you sort of that centering point when you come back to it. Because if North Face had been able to say that we're working toward this vision, and this is a thing that we're doing to work toward this vision, that's a lot easier to grasp.
Exactly.
And puts more context around it than you're going to give me a 20% discount for watching a video where you tell me that it's racism that doesn't allow Black people to go outside.
Right.
Right.
And it also creates this false perception that nobody who is a person of color goes outside, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
Like if you drive around Jacksonville, you go to any of our parks or our beautiful waterways, there are folks of, every race who are recreating outdoors. So the community that they're really catering to are folks who can afford expensive jackets that, P.S., you could probably just get a lot cheaper. But if you like the North Face, I'm sure they're very good. But it's one of those things where they're also making a lot of assumptions that maybe there's not people of color in their realm, in their space, but their space doesn't represent the whole of the outdoors.
Well, and even that, right? I have some friends of color who do wear North Face.
Yeah.
Do they get the discount? Like, is this for them? And it really is. It's this very odd dynamic. I think the intentions are so good.
Yes.
But I do think the reason behind it, like, it's important. And we know it's important. In this moment, we know it's important and we embrace that. But you said with Eddie Glaude, sell the vision.
Yes.
If I can tell you why I think it's important, if I can show you the world that we can have, if we all embrace this, I think you can get a lot more people to buy into that. Oh, that makes sense. What can I do to help make that come to fruition?
Absolutely. And I think there are some folks who are like, having a strong reaction to this particular case study. But if you said, do you want everyone, regardless of who they are, to feel safe and comfortable in outdoor recreation? I'm guessing that 95% of them would say yes. And so how do we talk about a lot about this, at the board level and within the staff, is how do we reach folks who agree but haven't been engaged in the right kinds of conversations and bring them into the conversation? And this was a missed opportunity to do that, but maybe we'll also create new conversations and ways of doing that. The other thing I would say is, in this moment, especially here in the state of Florida, where there's a lot of rhetoric on the political level about this work, there are opportunities for us to continue to find ways to sell that vision and spend more time on selling the vision and less time on reacting to what more extreme folks are saying. And so this kind of points to that too, is how can we really laser focus our work on talking about that future that we all want and that we know that 95% of people in our world are going to agree with, and getting after that and not getting too distracted by some of the more extreme rhetoric.
Well, and I think another thing that I want to highlight here is that I do applaud them for doing something.
Yes.
Now, I think that a little bit more guidance, and I think this is another thing where the reason you're doing it is because the space that you operate in is a majority white space. You may need some guidance from some outside individuals who have a little bit more experience in communities of color or dealing with the issues of race to assist you in moving this forward.
Yeah.
But I think it is also important to take steps and be prepared for some pushback, right? I think you have to be able to hear the smart things in it and make improvements and adjust and set yourself up to make adjustments as you go.
Yeah.
But be willing and committed to doing the work.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, at the end of the day, I really do believe the intentions are good, their heart's in the right place, and where they want to go. And I think they maybe have that vision even if they haven't articulated it, but their approach is wrong. But I do applaud them for taking a step and saying this is important, very publicly taking a step and saying it's important, and we want to do this.
Sure, and you wouldn't want anyone to look at this case study and say, oh, okay, well, the solution is to not do anything.
Right.
Because that's not the lesson here. The lesson here is to think about how we can sell a vision that everybody wants to be a part of and what that looks like, and how can we, if we're concerned that there's racism in the outdoors, which we should be, there's racism in many of our sports and recreation parts of life, then there are ways to get at that that are probably multi-pronged and create an abundance mindset rather than a scarcity mindset.
Right. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think there's some really interesting and unique ways and opportunities to do it. And I will also, my caveat would be, it can be transactional, but it shouldn't feel transactional.
Absolutely. Yes.
So I think that's also a good guiding line for companies.
I think it's also to say, to your point, when companies or organizations engage in these kinds of conversations, not everybody is going to be happy. And typically the loudest voices in the room are more on the extremes.
Yes.
And so it can be hard to do things in the face of that, knowing that you're going to get criticized no matter what. And so then the question becomes, what do you want to get criticized for?
Right.
Doing something or doing nothing?
Right. And also be prepared for it, right? I think about when the live action Little Mermaid came out, right? There was all of this noise, but we're not talking about all of the positive things that are also being said. And all of the positive comments were so focused on the negative ones. So if you are prepared for some pushback and prepared for some negative comments, but able to sift through the noise to take out the meaningful things of how you can bring more people along. And then also see, are you also having that positive impact? Because if you've got a few negative comments, but you're getting a lot of positive feedback, that's one thing. You got a few negative comments and nobody's giving you positive feedback, that's another thing.
Absolutely.
Right? So being able to make that determination, but don't let usually is about 10 to 15% on either side. Don't let that be the determining factor just because they're really loud.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it also brings into light that how important it is to really center that middle, that squishy middle, because that's where most folks reside. Most folks are ready to have this conversation in different ways and want to have that conversation. And, the funny thing about this particular case is that I would venture to say that the majority of folks that North Face was looking to reach probably very open to this type of conversation. Not everybody, but a lot. And so what opportunities does this company have to still reach those folks and continue to learn from this experience and continue to keep the conversation going in different ways? Hopefully that will be the outcome of this.
And I always think about this too, that the outer bounds, that 15% on either side, right? Those are my go get the manager people, right? I go get the manager when things are going really, really well, and I go get the manager when they're going really, really horribly. Do you have a way for the remaining 70% to give you feedback that will help guide you toward making better decisions? If this is the space where you're staying, how are you determining what would be good, what they would like? Again, those people who are open to it and thought it was okay, that's all right, cool. They're not likely to say anything. How are you getting feedback from them to then guide your decisions moving forward?
Great point. Yeah, and I would say also those folks, they're watching to see how you respond, to that 10 or 15%, and that makes a big impact too, even if you don't hear from them directly. But yes, seeking that input. What do you see as being the most effective ways for companies to do that?
Yeah, I think that is key. And thinking about that on the front end to make sure that it's built into the process.
Yeah.
All right. So as we have picked apart the North Face in this situation, I think I want to do our one big takeaway a little differently. So they took this very bold step and doing something, launching their commitment to DEI publicly, which I think the majority of organizations don't really do. I mean, we had a few people putting out statements after George Floyd's murder, but on the whole, DEI is an internal thing. For organizations who were thinking about doing something more public facing, what would be your one big takeaway for them from this situation of things that they ought to consider or do or think about?
So I think that the number one takeaway for this goes back to what you're saying is know what your why is and know what problem you're trying to solve with this work. And ask yourself, can I answer that question? And do I feel comfortable sharing the answer to that question? And so if you start with your why, you start with the vision that you're trying to create, you can go forward feeling comfortable that you have a way of talking about this that's going to bring people into a conversation.
And I think for me, to go along with the selling the vision, you have to sell the vision, but be prepared for the pushback.
Yes.
Because I think if you aren't prepared for the pushback may cause you to do something that runs counter to what you really want to do.
Absolutely.
And so you really want to, if you are launching this commitment, you want to be able to stand by it and be prepared to stand by it. So that may be preparing board members for things. That may be doing some preemptive communication in social media. That may be really taking a firm stand. I remember when Cheerios did sort of their series of ads. They started with the interracial couple, and then they had some same-sex couples, and they got a lot of pushback, but they were ready for it. And they put out statements very flat. This is what we're doing. We are committing to showing life in America as it is. These are our consumers. So, but it was also very clear to me, they had prepared everybody for the pushback. They knew it was coming, and they were like, we're doing it anyway. So I think knowing your vision, knowing your why, but be ready for it, and then have plans in place to deal with it.
Yeah. And I think in this case, had that happened, and they'd been able to say, here's why. We want to make sure that everyone we have the opportunity to interact with knows what it looks like to create outdoor spaces that are welcoming and safe and inclusive for everybody. And our goal is that. And, that number one, the initiative might have been rolled out slightly differently, but also number two, when there was pushback, which like you said, there inevitably is, they would be able to say, here's why we're doing this. And here's what it looks like to have an outdoors that's for everyone. And
then that's a much, much harder thing to argue with.
Exactly.
So, yes. All right. Well, this has been so great. we have to do this more often. I really like pulling things apart and examining situations.
So wonderful.
Yeah. So, Deirdre, it's always a pleasure to have you in the conference room. Thank you for joining us. Again, you will be invited back. Just go ahead and get the regular guest spot on. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Regina. Thank you for making these conversations accessible to so many people.
And thank you for joining us today. Please, please, please click that like button. We like to be liked. That also helps our content reach more viewers. And be sure to subscribe to be notified of any new content when we post it. We thank you so much for joining us in the conference room, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.